Silence is awkward, no? Especially on a Zoom meeting, especially around the dinner table, wherein I try to avoid silence like I avoid awkward eye contact, brush it off, and move on. However, in light of the concept that I drew today, silence and rest is absolutely necessary. 4. As my prompt states, alternating periods of rest and activity are essential to survive, let alone thrive. Now, in our politically charged, constantly connected 21st century America, it seems we have no problem identifying periods of activity. However, it is precisely because we have forgotten periods of rest that we so desperately need to re-understand it. 17th century philosopher and scientist Blaise Pascal proposes, humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. But the answer is as simple as define, discover, and determine. Understanding these alternating periods of rest and activity starts by understanding rest, which is so often criminalized. However, Thomas Merton, a respected religious writer, states, while silence can be regressive escapism at times, it can also be presence and awareness. Understanding that periods of activity are necessary helps us to avoid regressive escapism. However, how often do we think of silence as presence and awareness? Take, for example, Dan Harris, who was a World News and ABC News reporter priding himself on his impeccable social image, but had a nationally televised panic attack. Now, when Harris realized this, he stated that eventually he realized that the incessant, insatiable voice inside his head had propelled him through the ranks of a hyper-competitive business, but provoked the decisions that led to his on-air freakout. Although Harris was a man of activity, he was not necessarily a man of rest, which led to his ultimate demise. However, he writes in his memoir that it was when he discovered the creative power of silence and rest that he could truly embrace holistic living. And herein lies the discovery that alternating periods of rest and activity are essential because in the rest, true growth happens. In 2013, 6 scientists published a study for the National Institute of Health wherein they monitored brain activity in response to multiple types of stimuli. Now, this study found that exposure to silence generated significantly increased numbers of neurons in a process known as neurogenesis. It was the exposure to silence that generated this formation of brain cells, lending novel scientific support to the concept of creative silence. This concept of creative silence is something that occurs both physically, as in the creation of neurons, but also interiorly and spiritually. Recall that Jesus Christ himself took periods of rest, wherein he separated himself from the noise of the world in order to reconnect to his Savior, to his God, to his Father, who gave him life. And herein he embraced a holistic aspect of living out the gospel, that he needed this quiet time to confer with his Father and then live out the truth in word and deed. And so does active humanitarian Mother Teresa state, in the silence and purity of the heart, God speaks. Looking back to the Old Testament, even Isaiah 41 verse 1 tells of the Lord declaring, "Listen to me in silence, let the people renew their strength." This period of rest is absolutely essential and precedes our activity, but it is essential for our activity to be holy. And this lies the third point. Herein lies the third point of determining wherein we can incorporate moments of intentional rest. Now, never before have I witnessed a more impactful illustration of this than in medical official and mentor Dr. Scott Jones, an ordinary man perhaps like you and I, but one who witnessed this year's peak hospitalization season and was bombarded with stress, stimuli, and the suffering of the patients in his ICU team. However, he stepped out in faith and sought God in the sanctuary of a retreat. And in this moment of intentional rest, Dr. Jones found himself reconnected with the true vine. That quiet room that Pascal identified is both interior and exterior. And it ultimately is where Jesus Christ abides intimately. So I challenge you, make intentional time for moments of rest and let that spur you into activity for the glory of God.